In a year where Big Ten football almost didn't happen, where change happened daily, and where fans were living in constant uncertainty, comes a season of epic proportions. A season where the Indiana Hoosiers are bolstering one of the best rosters in decades. A season where expectations couldn't be higher, and the Hoosier Network coverage could not be greater. Welcome to The Rundown, a weekly pregame show that will bring together the greatest journalism that IU sports media has to offer. Each week, our team will give you the insight, the interviews, and the facts fans need to get ready for game day can be found right here on our show. So get ready. It's game day, and The Rundown starts right now. And yes, indeed, the rundown does start right now. Happy game day, ladies and gentlemen. It's finally here. After months of uncertainty, not knowing when Big Ten football would finally return, here we are, late October, and you feel the breeze in the air. You feel the 56-degree weather in Bloomington, not a cloud in the sky. Big Ten football is back, and so is IU football for a matchup against the Penn State Nittany Lions. And here at the Hoosier Network, we know this season's different, so we're going to do our coverage a little differently as well with this new show called The Rundown. How we doing? Welcome to the show. I'm Griffin Gonzalez, and now joining me here, Tamar Scher. Tamar, we'll get you on in here. Good to see you. Welcome to the show. And Tamar, this is a new look for the Hoosier Network coverage team. Oh, Tamar, I think you're muted here. I think there we go. I think we should be able to.
For the intro, I appreciate it. Technical difficulties because everything is new here in this Bloomington community. But I think I speak for the entire Bloomington community when I say I could not be more excited for this matchup today. IU, Penn State going together again, and we have football. So thanks for having me, and I'm so excited to be hosting with you, Griffin.
And tomorrow, I think we look at the show we got today. I'm looking at the rundown as we look. It's hard to believe how much content we're going to fit in just before kickoff. I'm talking packages, interviews, barbecue. We got so much stuff planned for the viewers today. Oh, what else we got going on? What do we have on the show today for our viewers to enjoy?
So the interview sections, first of all, we're going to bring in Griffin Epstein. He's a IU football analyst with yourself. He's going to give a little breakdown on both the Penn State side and the Indiana side. Connor Hines is coming to the studio to talk about the Peyton Hendershot situation. So that's coming later today. Then we got Kurt Spittler, who is at the stadium. He is our Hoosier Network representative. And finally, we're going to get to Galen Clavio on some tailgate talks and Mike Miller to give a bigger preview of who this Indiana team really is. So we got a great lineup coming up for all you, and we just could not be more excited to get it kicked off.
Hey, I'll tell you, I'm really looking forward to that Mike Miller piece. I know Mike's a clown, and we're excited to have him on. We're going to get some great insight from him and Galen coming on later today in the show. We got a lot of stuff planned tomorrow, but let's look at the big thing we have going on today. Penn State, Indiana, a 3:30 kickoff. The line is Penn State by 5.5 points. I can't remember the last time a top 10 team came to Bloomington in week one and was favored by that little of a margin. It's kind of hard to believe almost.
Right, and this is just a completely different season in itself. We had the COVID-19 pandemic that pushed our start date a little bit, but that doesn't mean that this team really hasn't come to play. I think they're going to show a lot of good potential because we just don't know where the season's going to go, and there's a lot of depth to both the Indiana and both the Penn State team, and I think that a lot of people are excited to see what's going to happen because these are two great teams, and I think this might be an upset, Griffin. I don't know about you, but I'm just going to say this is a really good matchup for us today, and I cannot wait to get it kicked off.
Well, hey, we can talk about upsets all day on the show. Surely that is something that's going to be on Griffin Epstein's mind. Well, we're going to bring him in just in a few minutes. But before we do, Griff is a very smart guy, and this week he really dove into this Penn State team. For you fans at home, you've heard about Indiana on the podcast. You've seen the scouting reports. If you've been keeping up with the Hoosier Network website, you've been able to see all the articles on all different aspects of the team. But do you know Penn State? Griffin Epstein went ahead and dove in for you, making a video about who this Penn State is and who you can expect to play Bloomington here later today. Let's take a look.
Hey there, Griffin Epstein with the Hoosier Network. It is finally game day as Indiana football takes on the 8th-ranked Penn State Nittany Lions. But who is this Penn State squad? Let's give you a quick scouting report, and we'll start with the quarterback. Sean Clifford is back for his second season as starter. It was an inconsistent first year for Clifford, but new offensive coordinator Kirk Shiroka, who comes from success at Minnesota, may help Clifford make that next step this year. Now, on the ground game, the Nittany Lions were dealt a huge blow when the presumed starting running back Journey Brown was announced out indefinitely with an undisclosed medical condition. But sophomore Noah Kane should be able to pick up some of the slack. In fact, he set a Penn State freshman record with 8 rushing touchdowns last season. Whose record did he break? It was some guy named Saquon Barkley. Now let's move to the wide receiver position for the Nittany Lions, and it's a definite weakness for Penn State. They only have one player returning with significant catches from last year. That's Jahan Dotson. But at the tight end position, Pratt Freiermuth is a name to look out for. He was a second-team All-American last year. Now, meanwhile, defense is always a strength for the Nittany Lions. It is no exception this year, and it starts with the defensive line. Defensive end Shaka Toney and Jason Owe will both have their names called on Sunday, but today you're going to hear their names on your TV set, likely creating havoc in the Hoosier backfield. Now, while Penn State's run defense was dominant last year, allowing just 91 yards per game, through the air, their pass defense struggled. They gave up numerous big plays, including against the Hoosiers. Penn State will hope to fix that today, led by all Big Ten third-team cornerback Tariq Castro-Fields, who will be tasked with slowing down IU's Walt Phillier. There's no doubt this Penn State team has oodles of talent, but there are some definite weaknesses as well. Can IU take advantage and potentially pull off a historic upset? We're about to find out. Follow along to the Hoosier Network on Twitter for live updates throughout the game, and enjoy your Big Ten football Saturday.
And there you have it, Griff Epstein doing the dive head first into who are the Penn State Nittany Lions. James Franklin surely has a great squad this year. Let's go ahead and bring Griff in. Griff, thanks so much for joining the show. I know you're getting ready to hop on the WIUX pregame, and then you're going to cover the game for the Hoosier. You got a loaded day, making time for us. Griff, I got to ask you first. You just talked about it a little bit. What is this Penn State's identity? When you look at them top to bottom, you've seen James Franklin, one of the most successful young coaches in the Big Ten Conference here today. What do you see as their main keys and their big identity when you look at Penn State?
Well, I think with most teams, it has to start with the quarterback. And I think especially for Penn State, it starts with Sean Clifford. And this Penn State program right now is all about taking that next step. They are a great team. They're consistently winning 9, 10 games a year, but they want to get to the college football playoff. They want to beat Ohio State consistently, not every 10 years. And to make that next step, you need an elite quarterback. Penn State's already got a lot of pieces, but they need Sean Clifford this year to take the next step. You just heard in the package, Kirk Shiroka is coming over from Minnesota. He had a lot of success last year, making Tanner Morgan really look like one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. We saw Minnesota take a huge step forward offensively and as a program. Penn State is hoping this year, Sean Clifford's second year, that he can really take that step forward. He's got some weapons. I think if he can do that, this Penn State team could be something really special this year.
And Penn State now has some trouble because Journey Brown is out for possibly the entire season. What, Griffin, do you think this is going to do for the identity of Penn State? How do you think this is going to impact their game to have that important running back out for potentially the entire season?
It's absolutely huge tomorrow. I mean, he had 100 yards against Penn State last year. Sean Clifford or against Indiana, I should say, last year in State College. Sean Clifford actually didn't have a very good game. The Indiana secondary did a good job of slowing him down, but it was with that big offensive line up front. And Penn State, year after year, has a good offensive line. They return nearly everyone from last year. So you're going to see some big boys up front. They're going to pave pass. But now you're without Journey Brown. So you're looking at a sophomore running back in Noah Kane, who doesn't have that same experience. And you really look at their running back, especially, one that has been the identity of this Penn State team the last couple of years in Journey Brown. You want them to get 15, 20 carries and be that bell cow running back. And for Penn State, I don't know if Noah Kane can do that. He was a backup last year, typically 10 carries at most per game, but he didn't even play the full season. He was actually hurt against Indiana. So this will be his first time against the Hoosiers. And you wonder, can Kane sustain himself 15, 20 carries and consistently get those big gains? Journey Brown, I mean, just for perspective, he had 230 yards last year in the Cotton Bowl against Memphis. Absolutely incredible. Penn State fans were so excited to see him this year. Him and an improved Clifford could make this a dynamic offense. Unfortunately for Penn State, he is out. So we'll see if Noah Kane can step up. He's really talented. As the package mentioned, he had 8 touchdowns last year. Great, big, physical running back. That 8 touchdowns I mentioned, he beat Saquon Barkley's record for freshman touchdowns. But the difference between Kane is he's just a physical guy, but he's not super fast out in the open field. So Penn State's looking for a big play. I don't think Noah Kane can offer that like Journey Brown. We'll see if he can step up today. They're going to need him with Brown out.
Yeah, you never want to see an injured player kind of factor into one team's success. But I think if you're looking from Indiana's point of view, Penn State losing Journey Brown certainly helps your chances just a bit today. I mean, after that news came out, we did see the line drop a point in Indiana's favor. The running back position at Penn State, though, always pretty dominant. Usually they can just load up another guy and they're going to be good. Griff, I want to move on and talk about the strengths and weaknesses of this team. We've talked Penn State all week. When you look on paper, you look at this roster, who is, or what is, I should say, the biggest strength of the Nittany Lions squad?
Well, it's both lines, and I think the offensive line is great. I already mentioned it. All 5 players have played in at least 5 games, so plenty of experience there. But I think out of all the positions, you have to look at this defensive line. They are big, they are experienced, they are nasty, and they caused Indiana a lot of problems last year. IU basically gave up on the ground game, typically something with Stevie Scott that the Hoosiers do pretty well at. Last year, teams averaged just 91 yards on the ground per game against this Penn State defensive line. They do lose Yetur Gross-Matos, who is now with the Carolina Panthers, but 5th-year senior Shaka Toney, he is going to be a big problem for Indiana. He had a big season last year. He is all over NFL draft boards, and it's going to be a big challenge for this IU offensive line. They've got all sorts of weapons. They got some young guys coming up, but what I've heard, NFL scouts are basically looking at almost everyone on this Penn State defensive line to have the potential to play on Sunday. I think they're actually better probably than Penn State. Wisconsin is the only, or better than Ohio State. I'd say it's Penn State or Wisconsin, the best defensive line in the country. They have been really dominant the last couple of years. I don't think that's going to change this year.
And big ask for you here. Do you think this Penn State team could be the second best team in the Big Ten? Or what are your thoughts on that? Because they do have that potential to be able to be great. But with this break in the season and coming in so late, what do you think that's going to take? What toll is that going to take on this Penn State team?
Yeah, that's the big question around Happy Valley. As I said, can this team take that next step? Can they beat Ohio State? Can they win the Big Ten championship? Can they make the college football playoff and kind of get to that next tier of the Alabamas, of the Clemsons of the world? And I think they have the potential, but it's going to be tough. They're going to have to put it all together. Obviously, I think this is a really tough opening matchup against Indiana. They have Ohio State early, in their season. It's just next week. So this is a tough opener for some changes. I think the hope is that with Kirk Shiroka coming in offensively, you can see Sean Clifford become a dynamic quarterback that in a late game, if we see a close game today, he can make some throws and beat Indiana. If we see a close game next week against an Ohio State defense that's obviously very strong, can he make those big throws? I think the defense is there for Penn State, especially the defensive line. The one thing that I'm most concerned about if I'm a Penn State fan is the secondary. They really cost Penn State last year. You look, they were 11-2. Obviously, that's a lot of victories, but their 2 losses to Minnesota and Ohio State, they were burned by quarterbacks that we, have mentioned is probably the 2 best quarterbacks in the Big Ten, in Tanner Morgan and Justin Fields. Just pass breakdowns, multiple big plays, and even against Indiana last year, we saw Ty Freifogel have a coming out party, even with Whop Philyor knocked out in the first quarter. Freifogel had a career high 131 yards. Indiana, I think, had 4 plays over 25 yards all through the air. The secondary is a little bit older this year, but they have struggled with communication. The linebacking core is really young this year for Penn State. They lost all 3 linebackers from last year So youth and some struggles in the past for Penn State make the secondary, I think, the most concerning part. If they can take a step forward and combine with that defensive line, I think tomorrow they absolutely have a shot and not only being the second best team in the Big Ten, but, really making things interesting potentially against Ohio State. And maybe in December, hearing their name called on Sunday morning to go to the college football playoff.
Thanks for that, Griffin. And now I want to move into the Indiana side of things. One thing that really hasn't changed is the coaching staff. Tom Allen, after last season, signed a 7-year contract extension with Indiana as he found success in the last season. And Jack and Griffin give a little overview as to how the coaching staff has been able to be so successful and what it'll take for this 2020 season.
Hey there, Griffin Epstein and Jack Ankeny back for our final Hoosier Network IU football position preview. Penn State 1 week away. We are so excited for that. So let's wrap up our position previews by previewing two parts of IU football that get a little bit less attention, special teams and coaches, but they're certainly going to be really important this year. And we'll start with coaches, Jack. Tom Allen in his 4th year, plenty of experience now as a Big Ten head coach, and the majority of the team are his recruits. What can he improve on this year for Indiana?
Well, I think when you look at the recent history of Indiana football, there's been some problems finishing games. You look at the Michigan State game last year, and then obviously that fourth quarter collapse against Tennessee in the bowl game. So I think late game execution is something that Allen can really stress on his team this year.
Now, the biggest change for IU in the offseason, coaching-wise, Kalen DeBoer, last year's offensive coordinator, leaving to become Fresno State's head coach. So now quarterbacks coach Nick Sheridan takes over as offensive coordinator. Will there be a big difference offensively from IU as we see a change in coordinators this season?
Yeah, I don't think so. Sheridan hasn't been too revealing about specifics about how he wants the offensive game plan to look like. But just when you think about the weapons that this team has, Stevie Scott, Wab, Hendershot, they're all guys that have been back from last year. So I think the major change that we'll see is really just moving from Peyton Ramsey to Michael Pennix. Pennix has a bigger arm. He's able to move around with his feet. So I think that's the number one change for this offense.
Let's talk special teams. Logan Justice, the kicker last year, graduating. Charles Campbell, the redshirt sophomore, takes over. Big shoes to fill. Is he going to be able to fill them?
Well, I think Justice is tough to replace. He might have left some unhappy Hoosier fans at the end of last year, but he didn't miss a field goal until that Purdue game. So I think Campbell has some pretty big shoes to fill. We have seen some upside for him replacing Justice in that Purdue game, hitting that clutch field goal. And then we also saw a clip of him hitting a long field goal in the team's scrimmage last week. So I think the coaches feel pretty solid about Campbell heading into the year.
Well, that does it for our IU football position previews. You missed any preview, you can check it out on our Hoosier Network website or our Twitter page. We've got them both written format and in video as well. For Jack Ankeny, I'm Jack Ankeny. We'll talk to you again.
Real soon.
All right, now you two are both the football analysts here for the Hoosier Network, so I'm going to play host for a bit. I need to know, what do you both believe is the identity of this Indiana team? We got the Penn State outlook, but give me what you think about Indiana. Griffin Epstein, I'll start with you.
It's a little confusing when we have two Griffins on, but I got to start with Michael Pennix. There's no doubt about it. This quarterback can be the difference maker for Indiana. And, I was talking about it with Austin and Derek are going to be on the call. They're in the stadium for WIUX. There is a buzz around Bloomington. There is a buzz in the stadium. Just driving from my apartment into the studio today, there was something in Bloomington I had not felt, I don't know, maybe since a big IU basketball game last winter. And I think a lot of that stemmed from Michael Pennix. He's finally healthy now. When he has been healthy, we have seen the arm. We have seen the accuracy. I think his coming out party was against Michigan State last year when he had 20 straight completions as a redshirt freshman in his first true road start. 20 straight completions, incredible. And I think from that moment on, Indiana fans thought, we got something special here in Michael Pennix. And I think they absolutely do. I think he's going to have a big game today. And he's also got plenty of weapons around him to throw the football. Super excited to see what Pennix does today for Indiana and all season long. You just got to hope if you're an IU fan, he stays healthy, because that has really been his only flaw so far.
Yeah, I think you finally get that buzz in Bloomington, because you actually might have a football team in Bloomington now. I mean, this team is really looking great on paper. I think when you look at the roster top to bottom, recruits, new talent that is coming back, young talent that is coming back at that, especially on the defensive end, this is a new kind of feel around Indiana football, one we're not used to. Tamar, driving around Bloomington earlier today, that same buzz, I would agree with Griff. You got people wearing candy stripes. You got hats on. You got socially distant tailgate masks wearing. Like, this is a new vibe around Bloomington because this team has a lot of buzz. And, I mean, I'm going to be honest, for the first time in quite some time, Indiana football fans get to wake up on Saturdays against Penn State and think, my goodness, they have a chance to win this ball game today. So the identity for this Indiana football team, when I think you look at it, we talk all the time, is for the past decades, it's been that Indiana's been the little brother of the Big Ten East, behind Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Michigan State. That little brother vibe is starting to go away. It feels as if this team is now ready to compete, and not even just ready to compete. They've proven that they can compete with some of the best in the nation. Now it's about beating some of the best in the nation. And I think there's a great possibility we could see that here later today.
You're absolutely right. And the buzz around town is this is the Indiana team that can do it. So we'll see if Tom Allen's squad has what it takes to be able to get that upset. But Griffin Gonzalez, I want to go to you because Epstein mentioned before that Pennix is back and is healthier than ever, as it seems to be. So if he can consistently stay healthy and show up, how do you think this is going to impact not only the game today, but the team as a whole?
I think it's a good question. I think what's going to really impact today with Pennix is you're going to see the accuracy. You're going to see the comfortableness. You're going to see somebody, I think the biggest change with Pennix this year is not going to be his health. The biggest change with Pennix this year is you take out Peyton Ramsey. Now you not have a guy gearing up for when you mess up or when you get hurt. You are the guy. You are the only guy there. They don't want to have to go to a backup. Ramsey, might I add, was not a backup quarterback for Indiana last season. Any other year, Ramsey would have been the starter. Let's not forget, he was one of the most efficient passers, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country last season. Now you have Pennix sitting comfortably in the driver's seat, knowing somebody's not asking for their turn to drive anytime soon. He's going to have that ability. He's going to have that confidence, and he's going to be able to throw the ball downfield. The one question around Pennix is, can he stay healthy? If he can stay healthy, if he can stay on his feet, if he can stay comfortable in that pocket, as well as being able to be mobile when that pocket collapses, he's going to have a great season. And might I add, we were saying on the podcast earlier this week, do not be surprised if he could be a dark horse in the Heisman race. Am I saying he's going to be a top 5 finisher? No, probably not. But he could be in that conversation if he can keep those numbers above 315 yards a game, more than 2 passing touchdowns week in, week out. He really can be one of the better quarterbacks, I think, in the Big Ten. And that's factoring in what Graham Mertz did last night. So with Graham Mertz, Justin Fields, this is a loaded Big Ten year for quarterbacks. And I think Pennix is easily up there with those names as well.
Speaking to not just Pennix, but the entire offense as a whole, Epstein, I'll start with you. What kind of potential does this offense have? What do you feel like they're going to be able to produce in the entirety of the season?
I think they could become one of the best offenses in the Big Ten. And, one thing we've talked about on some of these Hoosier Network podcasts has been Indiana has 3 players on the Maxwell preseason awards watch list, which goes to the best player in college football. No other Big Ten team has that many players. So the skill players on Indiana, the 3 skill players, obviously Pennix, which we've talked about, Watt Fillier, who is going to be probably a second or third round, I'd say, second day NFL draft pick next year or the year after when he decides to go to the draft. And then a running back in Stevie Scott that is really dynamic when he gets the football. You have 3 incredible weapons that are all getting national attention. And, no other Big Ten team has that number of skill players. I don't think Indiana's ever had this level of skill players, and it's not just those 3 as well. I think Samson James is ready for a breakout year at running back if he can get the number of carries. Remember, he was a 4-star, originally committed to Ohio State. He nearly transferred out of the program in the spring, decided to come back. I think Indiana, now with Journey Brown out for Penn State, I'd say after Ohio State, Indiana has the best 1-2 punch at running back. And then at freshman, we've talked about in the preseason, the depth there. That is the most exciting position for Indiana because it's not just Watt Fillier, who's very hard to cover because of his size and speed and ball catching ability. But Ty Fogel had an incredible game we mentioned against Penn State last year. Miles Marshall, really stepped forward last year. And Indiana's got a couple freshmen coming in that are 4-stars at the wide receiver position, which we don't say every year. So the skill talent for Indiana is immense. At offense, I think the best ever in Indiana football history, and a chance to have a really special season.
And taking it to the defensive side as well. So we saw that last year, unfortunately, Indiana was not able to get the job done, and that was due to the defense. And what's going to be really important is how to limit Sean Clifford's legs this game. So on the defensive end, what are the strengths of the defense, and how do you think they need to improve in order to keep that high status going into the season?
I think when you look at the Indiana defense, the one thing you see first off on that depth chart is you see a lot of recognizable names. You see a lot of guys who really shined last year. You see Michael Ziemba. He had a great season last year. Fell off a little bit at the end, but brought it back, played great. I look at guys like Reese Taylor, of course, another great talent, in-state kid. Has a lot to prove, showed up big last season. But then I look like a guy like Tywan Mullen, who has totally energized this Indiana football program as far as a recruiting standpoint goes. He comes in, highly recruited out of high school, chooses Indiana, and then for the months after his recruitment is tweeting daily, almost more than Tom Allen, about the excitement around this program. So I look at a guy like Reece Taylor, and I'm like, how can you not be excited for him and this Indiana defense? I look at a guy like Sio Nofakatotonoa, try saying that 10 times fast. I don't think I've pronounced it right once. It's a hard name, but a guy like that, Sio, defensive line, he's strong, he's big, and he's powerful. This is a kid who was squatting 500 plus as a senior in high school. If he can be able to establish himself more this season, he might be the guy to watch for Indiana football. Got a lot more PT last year at the end of the year. If he's able to expand and get inside past those big Big Ten East offensive linemen, he could establish himself as one of the better defensive linemen IU has had in the past few years. Very young, only a sophomore. If he can really establish that, he's going to be very talented. Then I look at the rest of the list. Listen, your key for this Indiana defense is that 3 linebacker spot. Yes, you lose Marcelino Ball, but you still have a lot of depth there. Micah McFadden, Cam Jones, Bryant Fitzgerald, Jamar Johnson, James Miller, Thomas Allen. You got a lot of depth at that linebacker spot, and that box right there. We talk about the box. That's the front 4 defensive linemen and the 3 linebackers. That is where you win Big Ten games. And in a season where you're only playing Big Ten games, those are your key spots. We saw too many times last season where you had the linebacking 3 core pushing up on a 3rd and 11, giving up, a big 11-yard first down run to a Penn State quarterback on a 9-minute drive. Those guys have to be able to grow past that and be able to trust the defensive line to create enough pressure to make the quarterback uncomfortable. If they can do that, that allows the linebackers to establish more coverage and make sure that kind of play doesn't happen. Bottom line, Tom Allen's a defensive coach. He takes a lot of pride into it. It doesn't matter if the offense is putting up 55 points a night. He wants his defense to be one of the best in the Big Ten year in and year out, and I think we have a chance of seeing that this year.
Absolutely. And honing in on the defensive side, Reese Taylor, like you mentioned, has been a big part of the conversation. And Griffin analyzes how he really can be that difference maker for Indiana this season.
Reece Taylor had been frustrated, but on a 2019 night at Maryland, his winning instincts took over. It was a moment that changed the trajectory of the now junior cornerback's career. A highlight of Taylor's unusual football journey. A journey that started in high school. Taylor was a phenomenal quarterback. He led Ben Davis High in Indianapolis to an undefeated state title in 2017 and was named Indiana Mr. Football. Heading to IU at only 5'11", Taylor was not built to be a Big Ten quarterback. He was expected to transition to defense, a place he had the skills to succeed.
And I think it has to do with just a guy that's played a lot of football in his life. He's seen offense. He understands what offenses are trying to do from a recognition standpoint.
But as Taylor started his freshman year, things changed. Injuries forced him to the offense as a backup quarterback, while also being used sparingly as a running back and wide receiver. Last year, before a sophomore season, coaches decided to let Taylor play exclusively at defense. But injuries derailed the first half of his year. Finally, mid-season, his number was called.
I had to step up. There was no other choice. I just made sure that I had to play in the defense right. I made sure I had to set a stone in the defense. Make sure that I wasn't just left out. I wasn't a fallen link.
More than a fallen link, healthy Taylor was a game changer. That Maryland interception, a game sealer. In November, a Taylor fourth quarter pass breakup helped bring the Old Oaken Bucket back to Bloomington. Now entering his junior season, Taylor has had plenty of time to fully immerse himself in learning the cornerback position.
Because of COVID, that was the time to really get in detail and getting the small work to getting to individualize each little small things in the position.
The talent and football instincts were always there, but now there's knowledge.
He understands our concepts better, and when you have wisdom matched with instincts, that can be a very deadly combination for a dynamic corner.
His route to cornerback was anything but normal, but Reece Taylor isn't your ordinary player. Now as he takes the field for his junior season, that cornerback is poised to be a major cog in the Indiana secondary. For the Hoosier Network, I'm Griffin Epstein.
Griffin, thanks for that. And one question on Reece Taylor. Why do you think he can be the difference maker, and why is he so important for this Indiana defense?
Well, I think this Indiana secondary is really, really important in large part because of the talented wide receivers across the board in the Big Ten East. Obviously, we'll see Jahan Dotson today for Penn State, but, across the board, Rondale Moore, of course, for Purdue, we'll see later in the season. In this Indiana secondary, they were consistent last year. We know Tywan Mullen is going to be able to make some big plays, really lock down a corner, but otherwise, last year, we saw some big plays from the passing game. I think Reece Taylor might be that player that we see make that step forward. You heard about his background, playing as a quarterback to start, so successful as well. I think that's going to really help Indiana this year in their secondary with Reece Taylor's background and now getting a long offseason to really learn that cornerback position. We saw him get lost a couple times last year, but also make some electric plays. I think the consistency is going to be there for Reece Taylor, and Indiana's defense has to hope that his consistency is a reflection of Indiana's defense consistency throughout the season.
Great stuff, Griff. Thank you for that. I'll tell you, Reece Taylor, being an Indianapolis kid growing up in the area, I feel like I've been talking about Reece Taylor for 8 years. Man, what a kid, what a talent. Should be fun to watch here later today at that Indiana cornerback slot. Well, we're going to start a new segment on our show. This is called The Breakdown. We're going to bring in a special guest now, two of them actually. We are going to bring in Griff and Evan Patrick with us. Hey, guys, they're right over here. There we go. Evan Patrick is a writer at Penn State for the newspaper called The Collegian. He is joining us from Happy Valley. Evan, good to see you. I know we've talked a lot this week on podcasts, everything like that. How are you doing? It's game day over there in Happy Valley.
I'm doing great. Thank you again for having me on the show. I mean, yeah, we've got Big Ten football. I could not be better at this moment.
It's just the vibes around the Big Ten. It's a good day. So, guys, here's how the breakdown works. What we're going to do is we're going to have a little back and forth conversation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you guys very similar questions, but pivot them based on Penn State questions, pivot them based on Indiana questions to the respective beat writers. Really easy. You guys get time. Let's not interrupt each other. This isn't a debate. This is just guys talking football, all right? When you guys are two of the experts on both these teams, so who better to talk with? So, Evan, you are our guest. I want to start with you. Penn State's heading out there today on pretty interesting without their star running back, Journey Brown. How do the Nittany Lions go around this adversity they're going to have to face today with one of their leading rushers?
Yeah, I mean, this was news that broke last week. I mean, that was really unexpected coming out of Penn State. I mean, Journey Brown was a guy who last season really became that number one back and really one of their best offensive players in general. And so Brown, he's out for potentially the entire season with an undisclosed medical condition that the team discovered this offseason. And it's a big loss for Penn State. He had a huge second half of the year in 2019. He had over 200 yards in Penn State's win in the Cotton Bowl against Memphis. But for Penn State, they have the luxury of having a guy like Noah Kane as his backup to replace him. I mean, Noah Kane was a guy who got a lot of run last season as well. Penn State went into the 2019 season really looking to use a running back by committee approach, and It just so happened that Brown kind of took on the lead role of that in the second half of the season. Now, without Brown, Noah Kane is going to be the number one back, and behind him, Devin Ford. Both guys played a good amount last season. They saw the field. Noah Kane, he's a power back who was actually very instrumental in Penn State's wins over Iowa and Purdue last season. In both of those games, he had over 100 rushing yards, and those were also the only 2 games of the season that he had 10-plus carries. And so when he is getting that volume of carries, he's shown that he can be productive. And so as big of a blow as it is for Penn State, I think they're going to be okay. Devin Ford complements him really well. He's more of a quick one-cut back who's going to get involved more in the passing game this season. They have 2 4-star true freshmen in behind him, and with this year not counting towards eligibility, I think that Kirk Ciarrocca's offense is really going to look for another running back by committee approach. He did that in Minnesota in his time there. Last season with Minnesota, he had 3 different running backs over 400 yards. And so I think we're going to see a lot of different guys get involved, but Noah Kane's going to be the main guy, and I think he's going to be able to fill the absence of Journey Brown.
And Griff, let me pivot this question to you. We've been talking all week about this last year's matchup against Penn State, the heartbreaker on the road for Indiana. It was 2 top 25 teams going head-to-head in Happy Valley. When with Indiana, Penn State, that doesn't usually happen. Indiana did a lot of right things on the road last year, but they also did a lot of wrong to find themselves on the bottom line of that one. When you look back at that game last year, what does Indiana need to do better to keep that mojo going and possibly get the upset today?
I think the number one lesson from that game and the number one key for today's game for Indiana's victory is stopping Sean Clifford's legs. Indiana allowed 50 yards rushing for Sean Clifford last year, but it wasn't designed runs necessarily for Clifford, who I wouldn't really describe as a dual threat quarterback, but it was just the pocket breaking down. Clifford taking off, especially on third down. Indiana really struggled. They were just 7 of 16 for getting off the field last year in third and fourth downs combined. They need to have a quarterback spy on Clifford. They need to be aware of his legs and also just have better situational awareness. A really big play, which I wrote about in my preview article this week. Penn State got the football. Indiana just scored a touchdown, so Penn State up just 9 minutes left in that fourth quarter, and they had a third down right away, a 3rd and 9, and Clifford, pocket collapsed. Indiana brought a blitz, no quarterback spy, linebackers had stepped back in coverage. He took off and ran for a first down, and that would go on to be a 9-minute drive, a touchdown that ended the game. So I really think Indiana needs to limit Sean Clifford's legs, and a big part of that that will help them is getting off the field on third down, something their defense struggled to do last year, and they were really worn down late in that game as that 9-minute drive showed. And, that was probably the difference in Penn State pulling out a victory last year in Happy Valley.
Now, let me ask you both this question. You're going to have interesting perspectives here. Griff, you've been covering this Indiana team for a little bit. Evan, you've been covering Penn State. Evan kind of has that outside Penn State view. So, Evan, let me start with you. Indiana has been seen, I've been using this term all day on the show, as kind of this little brother in the Big Ten for a while. I mean, you're behind the likes of Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin for years in this Midwestern-based conference. Now, when you look at Indiana, you see their ability to compete with top 5 teams over the past 5 years or so. Is Indiana starting finding ways to shed out of that little brother skin, grow up a little bit, and get a little more comfortable with these teams? Or from the outside of the Big Ten looking in, is Indiana still seen as that lesser team?
I think Indiana is still seen as that lesser team. And yeah, the games have been closer, but that's why today's game is so important, because you look at the stats, Indiana isn't beating top 25 teams. Tom Allen is 0 for 13 against top 25 teams in his 3 years so far coaching. Indiana doesn't have a top 25 victory since 2016 against Michigan State. And they don't have a top 10 victory since 1987. Our parents had just gotten out of college then. So Indiana hasn't won those top 10 games yet. And I think nationally, people are starting to come around to the idea that this Indiana team might be able to do that this year. I mean, hearing on College Game Day this morning, them talking about Michael Pennix, talking about that this isn't, your father's Indiana team. This is a team that can win these games. I think people are maybe coming around to the idea, but even me personally, until I see them win that top 10 game, I don't know if they can do it.
And same question for you here. You kind of have that interesting perspective, the outside of Bloomington looking in. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is if Indiana is going to make that leap and kind of be cast in a different light within the Big Ten, this is going to be a very good chance this season to do that. I mean, their team this season, from everything I've seen, I mean, they have a lot of the pieces to compete with some of these better Big Ten teams like you've been talking about. And I mean, this is an Indiana team that should not be taken lightly. And I think that's kind of been the feeling that I've been getting around State College for this last week and this offseason leading up to this game. I mean, when I saw this game as the first game on the schedule, the first thing that came to my mind was upset alert, because the last 2 times Penn State has played Indiana, it's been a very, very close competition. And I mean, this Indiana team, they're getting votes in the AP poll in these weeks. And I mean, I think that Penn State can't afford to overlook this team. It's an offense that I think is going to be very tough to slow down. And I think that, this season Indiana has a good chance to maybe pull off one of those upsets.
Well, gentlemen, I want to move on here to more in-game stuff today. We've talked big picture off the field. I want to talk about on the field. Griff, you look at Tom Allen. He was originally hired at Indiana to be a defensive coordinator, and defense is kind of his thing. And this Indiana defense has improved slightly each year he's been here. But you look at a game last year against Penn State as a prime example as where this defense has actually cost Indiana ball games. It was a 9-minute drive in the fourth quarter against Penn State last year that caused it. And it's not the first time it's happened. It's happened against Tennessee. It's happened against Ohio State. It's happened against Michigan. What does Tom Allen need to do differently from a defensive coach standpoint to be able to make sure those kind of late game lapses does not happen?
Well, I think a big thing has been conditioning, and we've heard a lot in the offseason about Aaron Wellman being brought in as the new strength and conditioning coach and using that time off basically since, they had 1 week of spring practice, and then everyone was sent off to quarantine, but trying to get them to stay in shape over that about 5-month period where they weren't even able to practice. And then once they came back, Aaron Wellman really working them hard. And I think one of the hard parts for Indiana and for any team that isn't recruiting at the level of Penn State, recruiting at the level of Michigan or Ohio State and consistently getting 4 stars, Indiana's more getting 3 stars, is they're not physically the same. And I think the conditioning program here over time is hoping that, you get to that situation. You need a stop to get off the field. You've conditioned well enough that you can do that. I think that actually is going to be hard today just because it's the first game and it's new. But I think Indiana has built towards that conditioning to get off the field. We'll see if they're ready potentially to do that today, if the defense has to come up with a big stop.
All right, gentlemen, we got time for about one more question for each of you. Got to get out of here. Been about 3 minutes. Evan, let me start with you on the Penn State side of things. I got to ask, you've looked at the scouting report. You've talked to players and coaches this week. What player or position group, in your opinion, really stands out today against Indiana?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that has to be the wide receiver position, because not necessarily because of what's expected of it, but what we don't really know about it. I mean, this is a group that probably has the biggest question mark on it going into the year. And it's Sean Clifford's second year as a starting quarterback. And last year, KJ Hamler dominated the target share. Those two had a really close relationship. And he was the guy that Sean Clifford was able to always lean on for a big play when he needed it. Now this season, Jahan Dotson is the only starter from last year's team that is returning to a starting role this year. True freshman Parker Washington is a guy who kind of surprisingly took on one of the starting wide receiver positions when that first depth chart came out. And a guy named Cam Sullivan-Brown is the other starting receiver outside of Dotson and Washington. And he's a guy who's dealt with some injuries in his career at Penn State, but has always been further down on the depth chart. And yeah, this we don't really know what to expect out of this Penn State wide receiver core. And I mean, that was a big problem last season. Outside of KJ Hamler, they didn't have a lot of options. And I mean, yeah, you have Pat Freiermuth at the tight end position, but the big plays from the wide receivers are going to be key in this game. I mean, no receiver in the last matchup between these two teams for Penn State had more than 2 catches. Sean Clifford only completed 11 passes in this game last season, going 11 for 23, just like 179 yards. So the passing game, receivers being able to get open is going to be key for Penn State in this.
All right, Griff, I'm going to go to you. I'm going to put you in a situational here. You are now the head coach of Indiana. I'm putting you in Tom Allen's shoes. Coach Epstein, you're going against the Penn State Nittany Lions today, top 10 team in the country. You're getting ready to run out on the field. What is the last thing you're saying to your guys for this week 1 matchup?
Well, we've worked for this. We've been through so much, and I think so many coaches are saying this. But it's especially true for Indiana, not just this year, but over the last couple of years. Is all of these close losses, all of these big games. Last year it was Ohio State when Indiana went in undefeated. Then they went to Penn State ranked. This was going to be the game. Tom Allen's got to say, we have worked for this. This can finally be the game. I think he's installed belief in his team, and I think he just needs to remind his team, you got to have that belief in your head all 60 minutes. And, you have the talent to compete with this team. Now go out and do it and get that big victory that everyone in Bloomington has been waiting for such a long time.
All right, gentlemen. Well said by both of you. Now, before I let you go, we got literally 15 more seconds. So let me ask, I want a prediction from both of you. What happens today? Let's start with our guest, Evan Patrick. Evan, give me your prediction. Give me your final score too. I'm curious.
Yeah, definitely. This game's going to be close, back and forth. I think that Penn State is going to get the job done, but barely. I've been saying this all week, kind of going back and forth on this decision. I'm thinking 38-34 Penn State.
All right. And Griff, how about yourself?
This is so tough. And, looking at this matchup, I have every reason to pick Indiana because I think IU matches up so well with Penn State. It's perfect to open against them. I think Penn State's going to come out flat to start, but I really think Sean Clifford's going to take a step forward. I think Kirk Stroke is a great offensive coordinator, and I'm going to go with Penn State to get that late drive to score a touchdown in the last minute, break Indiana fans' heart again. 35-34, Penn State wins today. It should be a classic game.
All right. Griffin Epstein.
I know that hurts, but that's honesty.
I get it. I know. It's fine. You're a journalist. You're doing your job. You're telling the truth. Griff Epstein, you were on a marathon today. Appreciate you joining the show. I know you got other places to be, so I'll let you get to it. And Evan Patrick, man, all the way from Happy Valley, thanks so much for being our guest and everything we did this week. Appreciate you, and best of luck with your coverage today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Griffin.
We now move on into a rather pretty serious subject. There was a lot of off-the-field drama this year for Hoosier football, mainly involving coronavirus. But for one player, tight end Peyton Hendershot, a lot more than that. Let's take a look at Connor Hines' package.
Hendershot slowed up but gets into the end zone. Touchdown, Indiana.
Last December, Indiana tight end Peyton Hendershot was enjoying the ride of a record-breaking season, what he calls the highest point of his life. 2 months later, he met the lowest, arrested on charges of domestic battery after an incident at an ex-girlfriend's house turned violent.
I want to say that I made a huge mistake, and I'm sorry to all the people who are involved. Like, everybody who I let down, I just feel horrible and so remorseful for, because there are so many people who have helped me get to where I am in my life, and I feel like that was just like a letdown to all of them because they all believed in me.
After serving his full suspension, Hendershot was permitted to return this fall. But that time away, likely his most important offseason yet. Weekly classes and mental health evaluations to help IU's tight end turn a corner and realize where he'll be needed most this fall.
It happened. We moved on from it. We talked a lot. I think the biggest thing he did was, he took it very seriously on the fact that he wanted to improve, not just as a football player, but as a young man.
I've saw basically my life and my career and my future flash in front of me. And so I never wanted to be in that position again. So I've worked consciously every day to better myself as a man and a human being.
Throw in the 2 off-season surgeries, and it's a journey still far from over. As tough as it can be to move on in life, sometimes it's the only choice.
Very well said there. Connor Hines now joining the show. Connor, one heck of a package done in there on the Peyton Hendershot situation. Let me just start off by your original thoughts. You went ahead and did the story here. Original thoughts on Hendershot and his return to the Indiana football program.
I mean, look, first of all, thanks for having me, Griff. Really appreciate being a part of this. But when it comes to Peyton Hendershot, when it comes to the receiving core in general for this Indiana football team, I mean, yeah, you have Stevie Scott. He's incredibly reliable out of the backfield. But Peyton Hendershot's importance this year, I mean, you cannot overstate it. It's going to be huge for him to stay present really from day one. And that begins today against Penn State. But I mean, look, going back to what he was a part of this past offseason, obviously a horrible look for his own self, a horrible look for the Indiana football program. But we know the motto of this Indiana football program by now: love each other. We know Tom Allen's leadership. We know what he's capable of doing. Rest assured, Peyton Hendershot did his time. He had conversations with Tom Allen. He had conversations with this entire coaching staff all offseason. He served his suspension. And now, of course, that challenge, as I kind of allude there in the story, the challenge is to move on.
The challenge to move on, indeed. I want to ask you, Connor, I want to talk about Peyton Hendershot, the player, here in a little bit. Were you surprised by the decision by Indiana football to bring him back so quickly? I mean, we're talking not even a game suspension, anything like that. I mean,
right.
He had a few, obviously some things he has to go through off the field, but were you surprised by no game punishment?
Yeah, I was, to be honest. And I think a lot of the Indiana fan base was as well. It is what it is. To be honest, I'm surprised he's going to be playing at all this year. Tom Allen seems like the kind of guy who would – I don't know if enforcing stricter punishment was the right course of action or taking him off the team altogether. But, look, we know what kind of leader – kind of reiterating what I just said. We know what kind of leader Tom Allen is. And, now I sort of get this feeling that, there's this mutual respect between the coaching staff and Peyton Hendershot and the rest of the players on the Indiana team, really. I mean, you talk about Tom Allen backing Peyton Hendershot so that Peyton Hendershot is able to back his team and stay present this fall. So I think at the end of the day, it came down to, really wanting one of their best receivers back on the field because at the end of the day, it is a football thing. He is a football player. This is an off-the-field issue, unrelated. I do think he should have serve some sort of game suspension, but it is what it is at this point. And also just making sure that Peyton Hendershot is a better person for who Peyton Hendershot is. The off the field Peyton Hendershot is completely different from what we see on the field. And I think this process that Indiana has gone through this past summer with him, hopefully has really changed him for the better.
Very well said there, Connor. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you coming to talk about that rather serious subject. And appreciate your work. We'll see you later.
Yeah, you guys got it. Let's hope for Indiana dub today. Thanks for having me on.
We'll see you. All right, Tamar back in here. And Tamar, I think I'm going to take a break now, and I think you got a special guest coming in.
I do have a special guest coming in, and that happens to be Mr. Kurt Hitler from the Hoosier Network. He's at Memorial Stadium right now. How are you, Kurt?
Good. How are you, Tamar?
Great. The atmosphere. How is it? Walk me through. Maybe tell us a bit about what the stadium looks like right now. Where are you sitting?
Well, I'm sitting first row, right by the end zone. The team's warming up. We got some parents in the stands. Still very limited capacity, but everything's going well so far. Here's a little view of what I'm looking at. I mean, you can't beat this. Sitting front row. It's been a lot of fun so far.
Fabulous. And your role, you are a photographer for Hoosier Network today. How are you going to be able to do your job and perform in this limited capacity like it is? You're not able to be right there on the field, but you still get front row advantage.
Yeah, I think it will work out pretty well if you ask me. It's not too far off from where we usually sit. I'm just lucky to be here right now. I'm really thankful to be here right now. And I'm ready to get things rolling.
What are you most looking forward to about this matchup?
I'm just looking forward to seeing two Big Ten football teams play in person. I haven't been to a sporting event since everything got shut down in March. I'm really excited. I think it's two good teams, two teams with a lot of things to prove, and fireworks could happen today.
Fantastic, Kurt. And if you have any predictions, could you give us one right now? Maybe a score prediction that you might have? And we are not.
I don't want to give you his prediction.
That was her answer right there.
I I know. Kurt knows sports betting pretty well, so I bet he had a great prediction. I'm kind of bummed we missed him there. I bet he had a good prediction there. But anyway,
follow up with him. It's okay. It's okay.
We'll follow up. We got to follow him up before kickoff because, whatever. Anyway, tomorrow we have our first special I wouldn't say – this is our first fun topic of the day. I feel like we've been grinding on IU football. Let's go ahead and bring in our special guest, Dr. GC, here to talk about – just the tailgate expert here today. We're talking tailgating. We're talking about best tailgate methods. We just need to get the – rundown as to how you do it and how it's done. How are you doing, though, first of all?
I love it. It's great. I'm happy to be doing something related to football again, man, but I wish I was at the stadium right now. That's really the biggest issue. It's not quite the same at home. I actually had one of the athletic department employees sent me a picture, and it was my tailgate spot. And the message was like, it's just not the same without you here. And I had to go outside and just sit by myself for a little while and kind of get perspective on things. It was really rough. But no, it's great to have IU football back, and it's great to be cooking again. And at this point, just ready for the game to start,
And you do host one of the biggest IU tailgates on the lot. You have that spot. I think Griffin and I have both been there. So what's on the menu today? Because, of course, you're not going to fall short on a game.
No, Tamar, I went all in today with what I was trying to cook because my thought process is, we're going to go big or we're going to go home. And I guess we're already home. So maybe that doesn't completely make sense. But no, today, we did 3 different things. So we started off with these beef short ribs. I've had them on the smoker since about 10 o'clock this morning. When you're doing beef ribs of any sort, it takes longer than you'd think. It's like a 5 or 6 hour process. And what I do, real easy, salt and pepper, and you just let them ride. You don't really do a whole lot. I don't even spritz them necessarily. I've got the big green egg set up here at home. So those have been rolling. These are tremendous. I mean, this is like eating steak on a bone. Just really tender. Also have been doing gumbo since this morning. And the gumbo recipe is it's both simple and complex at the same time. There's a lot of margins there as far as what you put in it. But essentially, you got to make a roux. You get the roux where it needs to be, and then you add vegetables, generally onion, green pepper, and celery, a little bit of okra, some garlic. You add some smoked sausage. You add some chicken. And then you just let it ride for about 5 or 6 hours on the stove. So we got that going. And then I also smoked some chicken wings as well. And those didn't take as long, only about 2.5 hours on the smoker. And then you just kind of crisp them up a little bit on the grill. So it's been great. We got some brews here. We got that food. We're ready for the game to start. And we've had some pretty entertaining games on the television as Big Ten football gets started up again here. Watching the Rutgers game, watching that Ohio State game, which was interesting for, about 15 minutes or so. So it's good. It's great. I mean, I wish I was out in the stadium tailgate lots right now, but we're making do with what we have here.
Yeah, Rutgers still up. I was waiting for the Michigan State comeback and not seeing that happen. But anyway, I want to talk a little bit about smoking meat because you refer to it as an art sometimes, a delicacy, if you will, and you truly do have a passion for it. And I got to see this firsthand when we went to Nebraska last year. I feel like every day I think about Nebraska, the story in my mind just keeps getting better and better and better about the people, the food, the just entertainment aspect, the fact that I had a corn head that was gifted to me. There's so many stories came from that trip. But I got to ask, when you think about smoking meats, when you think about the technique, the stuff, what is the big thing that people underestimate about when it comes to smoking meat? It's not something easy. What's a misclaimer, if you will?
Well, I think the biggest thing that people miss with smoking meat is that it's not cooking it on the stove or in the oven or even on a regular grill. So much about smoking meat is about time and just giving yourself enough of it. The thing about it looks easy on its surface. Because you've got your meat, you've got your heat source, and people are like, oh, it'll be simple. It'll be low stress. I'll just kind of put it on there. It takes a long time to do it right. I mean, this beef rib that I've got right here, if I did this on a grill, it wouldn't be as good, but it would be fairly good. But I could do it in like 30 minutes probably. On the smoker, it's taking 6 times, 7 times that amount of time. It's all about keeping your temperature low and understanding that what you're doing is approaching it from a completely different perspective than you normally cook. And I think that, when you first think about smoking meat and you first think about, okay, how am I going to do this and what goes into it, you think you know a lot. And look, I've been smoking meat for 15 years now. And what I find out every time I do it is that I know less and less each time. There's always something new that I learn. There's always a moment where, it looks like the brisket's going to be done in record time, and then it stalls at the same temperature for literally 6 hours. And you're just like, I don't know what to do. Like, how am I supposed to handle this? So you just learn to roll with it. You learn that, cooking, it really operates on its own schedule. And you might think you have control over it, but at the end of the day, you don't. And you just have to be willing to essentially let other forces take over and just be willing to roll with it as things go. And I think that's the big thing. A lot of people, they struggle with that control. They want recipes to be precise. They want cooking times to be precise. And they're just not that way. You have to be able to allow yourself to get into the organic and long-term nature of cooking. And if you do that, I think you're going to be okay. And it's funny because, you mentioned that Nebraska trip. Griffin actually got a chance to see me cry just a little bit in person during that trip, which I don't normally let people do. Like, it's tough with that. You don't want to let that vulnerability show, particularly as an authority figure like myself. But something brought me to that point. And I think that when you see that, Griffin, that's an indication of how really good slow cooking can affect a man from an emotional perspective.
All I remember from the Nebraska trip is seeing that meat just fall off. Like, you basically just tapped it and it just fell off that bone in the most beautiful way possible. And yeah, I'm glad we're all talking about this. I haven't had lunch yet today. I was saving lunch when I was watching the game. So this has been great. Thanks for this. Mouth watering. That's just what I needed.
Try it. So hopefully there's a day that we can all get together.
It'd be great. I mean, it's tough for people your age. I remember when I was in college, I didn't smoke meat. I didn't take a whole lot of time doing things because, you feel like you've always got to do something, and you're always, you're essentially kind of a slave to the pressures of the social scene that you're in. But as you get a little bit older, if you really embrace it, it's not just the cooking, on the smoker. It's also, braising things in the oven, and just doing a lot of slower term stuff. The flavor is so much better. I think that I'm not one of those people that like hates the microwave or something like that, but the flavors are so much better when you cook it and give it time and give it love. And that's essentially, I think, what this is all about.
Absolutely.
We're
going to move on here because we got Mike Miller coming on in just a bit. We want you to stick around with Mike because I want to hear your and Mike's thoughts. But what we're going to do really quick is Tamara and I are going to go back and forth here with a little tailgate rapid fire questions. We're going to start each question with best tailgate blank, and then we want you to fill it out as the tailgate expert. So let me go ahead and start off with this one. Best tailgate side dish.
Best tailgate side dish is probably going to be cornbread, actually, because it's portable, it's flavorful. It's not something you think about right away, but it fits with almost every meal that you're going to do at a tailgate.
Okay, solid answer.
And then what about the main dish? Or are we all going around and giving something?
I think everybody's got their own personal favorite on that. I think for me, my 100% favorite tailgate main dish is almost certainly the breakfast sandwich, where you take a biscuit, you take some kind of meat, whether it's bacon or sausage, you take some egg, you take some cheese, and then you put a little seasoning on it, maybe a little bit of mayo, you slap it on the grill, you let it kind of meld and combine, you bring it back out, it knocks the house down every single time.
That's a solid one. Best tailgate dessert. I feel like this one's an easy one. At least for me it is. I don't know about you. I always think tailgate. I just think of the little chocolate chip cookies that are like smaller, so you don't feel like you're eating as much. So you just like go 10, 15 maybe.
I have tried pretty consistently not to eat desserts at tailgates, normally because I eat too much of the main dish and the side dishes to even get to the dessert in the first place. But the cookies are a really good. I think the thing with tailgates is you want stuff that's soft enough that you can eat it without it, being too soft and unable to be held. So muffins actually also work really well, like a really nice chocolate chip muffin or something along those lines, because you got to really think about that portability when you're in the tailgate areas. If you don't have that, you're either really messy at the end of it, or you weren't that satisfied with what you ate.
And it also depends on what time of the day it is, because if you have a 7 p.m. game and you are all day tailgating, you have to make sure that you have enough food to keep in your system. And do you want breakfast food at 5 p.m.? I don't know about you. That's not my vibe. But then now moving away from the food, best tailgating atmosphere. So best music, best weather, in your opinion.
I mean, what we've got today is pretty close to ideal. I mean, right now it's 52 degrees. It's sunny. I'll go all the way up to like about 65 to 70 degrees. You get hotter than that, and it can be a little bit tough, especially if the sun's beating down on you. I've obviously tailgated in a lot colder temperatures than that, and I don't really enjoy it very much at all. I used to tailgate at the University of Miami when I lived down in Miami quite a bit, and man, some of those early tailgates in the season, where it's like literally like 88 degrees with 95% humidity, that's a big no for me, dog. But this time right here, like mid to late October, as long as it's like this, as opposed to like it was yesterday, where it's just like raining and gross for the entire time. If you were at the Michigan tailgate last year, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That we want to avoid. But this, to me, 100% all day.
All right, we got time for one more before we welcome Mike Miller into the show. This one, I'm just curious. Best tailgate accessory. So this could be the tent, the grill, the cornhole, the chairs, just overall, the cooler even. Best tailgate accessory.
It's almost certainly the Blackstone Griddle, which I recently added to the repertoire. The griddle, it's such a tremendous thing. I mean, I've got a tailgate grill. I've been using it for years. You can, what we saw at Nebraska where, you're towing a smoker out there, that thing costs $10,000. So if you got the money, great. Most people don't. You get the Blackstone Griddle. It's $300 maybe. You bring a propane canister out there. You can do so much with it. And it's going to keep people happy for a long period of time throughout the course of your tailgate. Obviously, the canopy's nice, but I'm on my 4th tailgate canopy in the last 10 years because those things break. They're not well put together. They're essentially just a money grab by Dick's Sporting Goods to try to get you to keep going back and buying more canopies. And once you bought one, once you've got a canopy at your tailgate, you can't the next year be like, sorry guys, it broke. We can't have a canopy. No, the expectation is you got to have that canopy again. And so I'm kind of bitter about canopies right now, but I will say that by far, get the griddle. You won't ever feel like you made a bad purchase there.
You're the only person I know who could go on a tangent about the overpricing and overuse of a canopy at a tailgate. Oh my goodness!
They're gouging us, Griffin. Come on.
My goodness. All right, bringing in now Mike Miller. Excited to have you both here, considering the fact you guys have watched a lot, and I mean a lot, of IU football throughout the years. You've seen the good days. You've seen the not so good days. And I would like to give your take on a few things before our final segment here today, before we head into game day. We got about 12 minutes. Like we just said, you guys both covered the highs and lows, especially over these past 10 years. What would you say, I want to start with Galen here, what would you say has changed the most about this team since the early Kevin Wilson era?
I think the biggest change has been that the university acts like it cares about the football program. I mean, when Kevin Wilson took over in the early 2010s, I don't think people realized how bad it was. It was like football was essentially just kind of like the redheaded stepchild of the athletic department. It was just not attended to well. And that went all the way back, frankly, to, when I was in school and before that. It was one of those situations where there just wasn't money. There wasn't money spent on coaching. There wasn't money spent on, much other than just the facilities. And so Obviously, I think everybody would have liked to have seen the Kevin Wilson era yield more than it did. But what it yielded more than anything else was a real focus on trying to make football at least halfway competitive, which is halfway further than it was in the 2000s, under Cam Cameron, under Jerry DiNardo, under Bill Lynch. And, certainly Terry Hepner kind of poked through there a little bit, but unfortunately wasn't around to really see it to fruition. So, for me, and I mean, Mike came in around the same period, there was a real marked change in how athletics approached football. And I think that to me has been the most gratifying thing as someone who's been coming to IU football games since the 80s.
And Mike, welcome to the show. Happy to see you. What kind of hat is that? What kind of hat we're rocking today?
It's a 90s Baltimore Orioles hat. It feels like every time I do some sort of IU podcast, I'm typically like wearing some sort of Orioles gear. It's usually by accident, but I was just out back tending to the grill. Minor disaster. I almost ran out of Frank's Red Hot. I'm trying a new recipe, so I apologize for being tardy. But Orioles hat.
Flat bill means you're a cool guy, right? That's
I kind of
how it works. Just a little bit in there. Mike, you covered the team for a long time. I guess you kind of saw this rise happen over your coverage of this team. What were your thoughts on kind of bouncing off what Galen said there?
Yeah, I think exactly what he said. I think that's number one. Just this understanding, institution-wide that, or at least department-wide, that football matters beyond the sake of just making football matter. It matters just for the bottom line, and actually putting the money into making all those things happen. That's number one. I would say just exclusive to football-wise too. With that, just I think one of the big things from the Kevin Wilson era was just this belief that IU could recruit better. And it could recruit above, a MAC level and actually get some guys that were going to matter in Big Ten games. And over the course of the last decade plus, you've seen IU slowly get to that point where, the second string guys are Big Ten caliber. I mean, I'm not sure it's all the way across the board just yet. It's probably very, very close to being there, but just the gradual progression in recruiting talent and recruiting Big Ten talent at that. And I think that's really been a progression we've seen take hold over the last decade.
And now going off to the Big Ten as a whole, Indiana, of course, not going to sugarcoat it, has that bad historical rep in the Big Ten as a whole. But with its recent success, do you think Indiana's losing that little brother status and that label that it's carried with it through its history? Mike, I want to start with you with this question.
Yeah, I think this could be the big season. I think I've talked to Galen a few times about this over the last month that, in this weird season, how we're sort of shifting the way we set our expectations where, in a year like this, what I think a lot of folks want to see is just sort of taking that next step, which is going to be beating a team like Penn State, beating a Michigan. And I think once you're able to do that, I think you're able to sort of start clearing that bar and at least starting to reset, the views of others in the Big Ten of how Indiana is seen. I think Indiana is starting to get a little bit more respect than it has at any point in recent years. Just last year did wonders, and I think the fact that they're returning so many players from that, I think people are looking at this program now and seeing a team that has talent, has Big Ten talent, and that people should take seriously. So, but it's really going to take starting to actually win games like today, really start to take hold in a sort of meaningful way.
And then, Galen, I'm going to take it to you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, look, it's mostly unheard of that IU is not the little brother in the Big Ten, but it has happened. I mean, you go back to the Bill Mallory era, and from 1986 until 1994, that team regularly won 6 games, 7 games, 8 games. They'd have a 5-win season in there every now and then, but that was the lowest that they sunk. And look, is it ever going to be feasible that IU is going to be Ohio State or even Michigan in the Big Ten? No. I mean, it would take 100 years and probably the dissolution of Ohio State as an academic entity, which, I mean, we can always hope. But what it really comes down to at the end of the day is that IU can, I think, be an Iowa. They can be a Minnesota. They can be a Michigan State. Like, there's nothing in the water in Bloomington that says thou must suck at football. it really does come down to hiring a smart coach, giving that coach resources, and getting people to believe in the idea of coming to Bloomington to play football. And, I think Tom Allen's done as good of a job as anybody since Bill Mallory with that mix of things. And look, I mean, who's to say? I mean, the idea that IU, like everybody else in the Big Ten, look at what Purdue did under Joe Tiller. They had one unicorn season where they went to the Rose Bowl. Under Gary Barnett, Northwestern had a unicorn season where everything went right and they went to the Rose Bowl. Minnesota's had 9-win seasons. Michigan State's been to the BCS playoff. Like, there's nothing different about those programs from Indiana other than they gave enough resources and put themselves in a position where they could be successful. And then one year they were. So, look, I think when you look around the Big Ten, it's a tough conference. There's a lot of money. You've got programs like Illinois and Rutgers and Maryland that struggle at the bottom. And I think for IU to be successful, they have to break out of that tier and get to that next tier. History's kind of against them on that, but that doesn't mean that they can't do it.
Well, guys, I want to move into the actual game at hand. We got 5 minutes till kickoff, so let's go ahead and get the keys to the game. What does IU need to do today to secure an upset against Penn State? Top 10 team, James Franklin, clearly motivated, tweeting out only Indiana this week. So what's the key to the game for Indiana? Let's start with you, Galen.
James Franklin is like the Applebee's menu of Big Ten coaches. I mean, it's just like he's got this kind of atmosphere about him that just makes you think, hey, this dude just can't be serious about what he's doing. And yet he's actually a good football coach. He's not like a gourmet chef like, maybe an Urban Meyer was or something like that. But he is able, I think, to motivate his team against programs that are around the same level or below. For IU, I think the big thing is it doesn't matter what James Franklin does. It matters what you do as IU football. IU football has to look back at the last 4 or 5 years and say, yes, we believe we can beat Penn State. We believe because we've almost done it on several occasions. We've been within striking distance, and we've either run out of gas or we've had injuries or some combination therein. So to me, it's like you're not going to be as talented as Penn State. You're not going to have the depth. But you're not talking about like 3 or 4 deviations, from the mean here. You're talking about a team that if you play your best game and if you believe that you can win, you can win. So I think for IU, it's about belief. It's about getting started strong. And it's about not letting things that happen throughout the game affect that belief. That's something IU has struggled with. Let's see if they can do it here. I kind of like their chances just because of the way that things are lined up for them right now. But really, they have to do it for all 60 minutes. And I think that's been the biggest challenge for this IU team. We saw it in the Gator Bowl, and we've seen it on several occasions before that.
All right, Mike, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with everything Galen just said. So I'll sort of just look at a quick matchup, and that is the Indiana interior offensive line. I think when you look at the tackle positions on that offensive line, you see guys that I think Indiana can feel comfortable playing with at that Big Ten level. You have a senior center in Harry Kreider, but I think there's still some question about those guard spots. So I think that interior, the interior of the Indiana offensive line, I think that's going to be a place to watch during this game because it's really, truly it's cliche. We all know this, but it's really going to dictate what this offense is able to do. So I'm looking at that as much as anything, and also just how does Indiana's defense handle Penn State tight end Pat Freiermuth? Like that's probably the one player I'm looking at in that Penn State offense right now. How does Indiana's defense account for that? Early in the year, how are these defenses accounting for sort of that safety option within an offense? So I think those two areas will be have my attention today.
All right. Before we wrap this show up, it's been a long hour and a half here, guys. Let's all finish tomorrow, me included. Final picks. Mike, let's start with you. Go ahead. I want a score prediction today. I'm gonna make you do it. Yeah, let's get a score prediction. -5.5.
I said I think last time I podcasted with Galen, I said this score was going to get into the 40s. I'm going to turn that down just a bit. I'm going to go 38-35 Indiana. I'm in for this. I think Indiana is going to win this game. I think Penn State is maybe still a tier above, but I think that separation between the two schools it's not as wide as it it used to be. It's certainly not as wide as I think a lot of people think it is. And I think just given all the weird circumstances, first game, Penn State's traveling, everything else, the fact that Indiana is just a good football team, it appears, I'm going Indiana 38-35.
Yeah, I'm gonna do the same. Actually, I think my updated prediction on Crimson Cast last night was 38-34 Indiana. So the fact that Mike and I are on the same wavelength is really kind of frightening, but because that almost always spells terrible news. But look, I mean, you have to learn, if you're an IU football fan or a person that follows IU football, you have to learn to be willing to let yourself get hurt. You have to walk out into the ocean with your arms spread wide open, expecting to get smacked straight in the chest with a 30-foot wave. And, every once in a while, maybe it doesn't happen. That's the big question right now. Can IU manage to pull off a win here against this Penn State team? I think they can. It feels like they believe in themselves, and we'll keep our fingers crossed that they do. But, yeah, 38-34 Indiana, that's the call from the deck here.
All right, Tamar.
And me, I'm going to take it in the reverse of last year. I'm going to give it to Indiana, the 34-27. So I do believe that the amount of time they've had to prepare the offseason, getting them amped up, they're at Memorial for their first game. I just think that is going to give them so much more of an advantage. And I'm hopeful for that upset. If I'm not being crazy, I can tell, because I just think that they have that potential. What about you, Griff?
Oh, man. I'm wearing my blue today for a reason. Listen, I think Indiana's close. I think this is going to be very similar to last year's game. I think it's actually going to be closer than last year's game. It's going to come down to who has the ball late. And if I'm going to have to be a betting man today and I'm going to get the opportunity to tell all three of you you're wrong, I'm going to take that, because if I get to tell you all three you're wrong, I get to be right. But if I'm wrong, then, IU beats top 10 ranked team. So it's a good day for me no matter what, right? But that is going to wrap up our show today. Thank you so much for joining us here on The Rundown. Go watch some IU football. We'll see you next week for round 2 against Rutgers. Guys, thanks for being here. Tamar, thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.